So the question I wanted to ask is, in most countries, certainly in sort of developed countries like the United States, a key element of kind of bringing together academic research, civil society, scientific contributions actually comes from a philanthropy sector. It is not driven by sort of government funding or handouts. And so my question is, how do you think Indian philanthropy has engaged with issues of sustainable growth? Sort of, how do you think the community views it? And can you tell us something about what you feel a sort of forward-looking strategy might be to engage?
So thank you all for having me here to share my perspectives on the role of philanthropy, and particularly, I think, Indian philanthropy in the broader point that you put ahead, Anand, that this panel and this conference is not just about noting the current situation, but how we can, as a community and as a collaborative, come together to build institutions and movements that can support a long-term vision of how does India achieve more sustainable growth over time, both growth and sustainability while we're doing it. So I wanted to start by just giving a little bit, well, okay, before that, I think much like Bala was saying, I'm using your first name, that I also feel it's very important to have Indian institutions which are rooted in this space, that over time, particularly if things have to happen at the scale that I believe is needed and at the geographical diversity that I think is necessary, in such a varied and heterogeneous country, it is important to have organizations rooted throughout the nation which are focused on this goal. And yes, like India, like many other countries, while it does have numerous state-supported institutions, the IITs being a prime example, which are focused on both research, growth, and academia, like all over the world, the role of private sector giving and private philanthropy does have a role to play in India, already has, and will continue to do so. So just to set some context, I thought I put together a few slides on the general state of philanthropy and giving in India. So just in terms of numbers, private giving, well, giving as a whole is very large, I think, as a segment. So the private giving landscape estimated last year and the last financial year is about 1,21,000 crores. So that's about $14.5 billion as of the last March. And this is expected to almost double in the next 4 to 5 years. So it's both substantial in terms of volume as well as growing fairly fast. Already domestic funding is more than 80% of the overall giving that is happening in the country. I think most of academia, like most people in this room perhaps, are a lot more familiar with some of the international organizations that do work in India, but as a fraction of what is happening, that is actually still only 19% and projected to keep dropping by, the estimate is something like 11% in FY28, that all the Indian giving segments are growing much more rapidly, than the foreign sector. So when foreign sector is the kind of thing that, we are familiar with, retail refers to a lot of private giving to donations at the retail level, community giving to particular case in the community, including through trusts, charities, local religious institutions, and so forth. India has a framework for corporates to devote 2% of their profits to more altruistic or impact-oriented goals. So that is called the Corporate Social Responsibility Framework, which currently is 23% of private giving. So it can include development near where the industry is, or a whole range of things, of course. And then one of the largest segments is family philanthropy. I have more experience there where, business families, professionals, first-generation wealth creators, and so on, many and growingly are contributing a lot in this space. Very briefly, that currently environment and sustainability, the base is small. It's about 11% from ultra-high net worth individuals and 12% from CSR, and we don't have sectoral data for the other segments. To date, education and health do receive the vast bulk of funding from private philanthropy in India. But there has been growth for climate action, biodiversity, conservation, and so forth, and we expect that growth to continue. This data so far was all from the India Philanthropy Report 24 from Bain and Dasra, just to give the citation for some of it. I just wanted to talk a bit about our work that our family supports and the range kind of. One is our core internal Janhavi Nilekani philanthropy is the internal grant making foundation, which does a lot of work in conservation of wildlife, biodiversity, ecosystems, human wildlife conflict mitigation. We support a very vast range of universities and think tanks from IIT Powai to the Indian Institute of Habitat Settlements. It's a long list. I'll not go into it. Argyam is a large organization working on water security and water quality. In fact, I've been involved with that for 16 years. And a lot of what we do is about participatory groundwater management. Some of the issues we talked about in the context of Punjab, but Punjab is a little drastic case, but the issue is true across the country. And other work, in climate action, in research, and conservation. So, and just to share my own thoughts on the role Indian philanthropy should play in this movement. And to an extent, I think also my thoughts on what can this community of, the community of researchers also should perhaps be engaging with Indian philanthropy. So I think first, I would like to see from Indian philanthropy, I think in general, a greater focus on growth of any type. A huge amount of the focus is on the current as opposed to the future. It's on amelioration of current distress. It's need-based giving. This is important. I don't want to take that away. But there is the government. There are many other players who are able to do that. But philanthropic capital has the ability to be patient. It has the ability to take risks. And it has the ability to really invest in the kind of long-term, future-oriented strategies in institution building, which sometimes other sectors are not able to do to the same extent. It is, to an extent, philanthropic capital does not need to answer to either voters or shareholders, and that does allow a great deal of risk-taking. So I would definitely like to see more of that risk-taking from the sector, given that we are very positioned to do it. Again, we've talked a bit about why we should care about the environment, and it's a sector I would again like to see more priority from Indian philanthropists. Both, we are already able to see a certain degree of, how much climate vulnerability will affect development. They are already very noticeable, and as the presentations all day have noticed, substantial social cost to high levels of pollution. And even when it comes to ecosystem preservation, the number of ecosystem services we get, we actually have barely measured how much it affects us, be it from marshlands to, preventing through how these ecosystems support both preventing droughts, flooding, or anything else. And finally, I think perhaps the biggest thing that we as a family and me personally really believe in, that it's very, very important for philanthropists to give institutions unrestricted core grants, anchor grants, and unrestricted funding. There is a very much a strong, even when people are giving strategic investments. So quite aside from the issue of most giving being needs-based, even when it comes to strategic philanthropy, there is very little trust to just give unrestricted funds. But be it an NGO, a school, an academic institution, if the very powerful, often group of human capital collected in that institution is spending its time trying to keep the lights on, constantly fundraising, constantly having to worry about core staff costs, about compliance costs, about the basic minimum, it's a waste on many dimensions. Neither can that institution really use its entire full creativity, but also, it also really if donors are driving very project-based funding, it quite constrains the creativity and potential that can come out of those institutions. So any personal philanthropy I have done has always been unrestricted and in fact very focused on core endowments. And that's something the family also really believes in, but is quite limited in an Indian context, and definitely something I would like to see a lot more of. So some examples of our work as a family, which have been really in this space, like giving a C-STEP, an anchor grant to set up an entire climate adaptation vertical, wherever that may go, or funding the India Climate Collaborative to go where it has to. And they've been coming up with really fantastic products, like services, things like the Climate Risk Catalyst, which is detailed, granular, district-level data on heat stressors, conservation, pollution, and the kind of climate-entailed risks that diversified geographies will have. For institutions to be able to come up with this kind of work, philanthropists need to be able to trust that more and enable that to a greater extent. Coming to what us as a research committee have exited kind of, but still one toe is still always in this door, I think, can do. I think One is, I think, to recognize that for better or worse, the willingness to fund research of any type among Indian philanthropy is limited for a multitude of reasons. Two ways around that. One definitely is to ensure that that research is very focused on real life cases, usable. I think Robin had brought it up in the morning of like what research does India want? And I think that's a good lens to try and see what can perhaps where researchers can engage with Indian donors. Trying to be conscious, I think, of the cost effectiveness of research. Like research often truly feels unaffordable to Indian philanthropists. I face the foundation I run, we have consciously had to shrink our research budgets year after year because the opportunity cost is so high because the per rupee just doesn't get you very far. But I think it's important to engage with this space, as I showed in the numbers. Just from being practical, the rupee volume of Indian giving is large and growing, and it is important to continue to engage with Indian donors. Indian donors are also able to use their funding for a wider range of institutions due to various regulatory restrictions on where foreign money can go for good reasons. But therefore, Indian rupees have the ability to go to a much vaster range of institutions, both geographically and scale-wise diverse, many of which have a lot to contribute. So in general, I mean, I'm excited to see some of these institutions continue to grow. There already has been fantastic support, be it for Ashoka or for the Jindal University, Shiv Nadar University. There has already been, I would say in the last 15 years, more huge amounts from Indian philanthropists to establishing strong Indian institutes, which can provide leadership in coming decades. And I'm excited to see that continue. And it's been great to be part of this discussion. Thank you.